I always like that it lets me know that it is recording. Let's see. I know that Christy is traveling, I believe. And then I am not sure if Ames is going to be able to join us or not. He had emailed me and said he was in between meetings. So the only person we're waiting is Marco. I have Norma Jean here. Norma Jean, if Marco comes, can you let him in, please? And I think it's 2:30, so we'll get started. So I sent out an agenda to everyone. Obviously, there's been some news today out of the governor's office with regards to the SOP. So I think we need to talk about that. I don't think we need. Do we need to do introductions again? I think we've done those in the past. So I don't think we need to do those again. As far as the norms are concerned, be respectful, listen to other people's ideas. We had gone through those the last time as well. I think it's really, honestly, time to get into the meat and potatoes of things. So I had sent a packet out of information. I thank you, Kathy, for putting that together. So I am going to turn it over to Kathy to kind of review some of our current statistics.
Okay. So I'm gonna, we'll put this on the website after this meeting with everything updated, including the recommendations to the board. So those that are watching the webinar or watching the recording can see what we're discussing. Some of this is already exist on our website, but I just wanted to highlight the current numbers. So our RSU dashboard currently has us at 402 cases since the beginning of the year. It is broken down by students and staff. This was updated last night, as well as our cases by the month. And as we had talked about, January 11th, we stopped doing close contact tracing, which meant we actually no longer know what our number of quarantines would have been. So we were able to see those quarantine numbers if they would have been in quarantine if we were unmasked at the time. But January, February, we are no longer contact tracing. So that's why those are non-applicable. As you can see, January had our highest month of cases with 173. And then we had a sharp decline with only 45 cases. I will say with our pool testing, 4 of our 5 schools have done pool testing this week. So we tested everyone on Monday and Tuesday, and all of them have come back negative, except for the high school is still pending. So we don't know the full results of the high school at this point for this week, because I know everyone is always concerned. What does it look like coming back from break? Sometimes we don't see it in this first week. We might see pool testing results this second week. So that is the second page. So the next 5 pages are one by every school. And so what I have done is someone wanted to know pool testing, kind of what are our numbers? And so I have charted for you how many students we actually test. I say students, it also includes staff. So how many pool participants? So we might, for example, in Libby Tozier on 11:15, there were 7 people that were tested. There might have been 15 that were signed up, but if you're absent or if there's a reason, if you are positive or in your 90-day window, we wouldn't test you. So we actually sent off to the concentric lab 7 vials on that week. And then the next week we showed 9. The next column shows you the number of individuals that are positive and in their 90-day window. So you can kind of see how many are in that 90-day kind of exemption period. If they're a pool participant, we're not testing them in that 90. And if just so you can see how many are active cases going on. So you can see how many we're actually testing weekly and also how many are in the 90-day window at the time. So we've broken that down per school. So you can kind of see what our average percent is of pool participants. So for Libby Tozier, we are pool testing about 6%. Sabattis Primary doing about 10%. Carrie Ricker, we're pool testing about 11% of the population. Oak Hill Middle School, we're doing 11%. On the high school, I did not do the average. I can figure that out. So I will, it's a little bit higher, but not by much. The next after that, so that kind of just gives you a snapshot of what our pool testing is giving in terms of numbers. The very beginning of the year, the DOE and DHHS required that we post our staff vaccination. So these numbers are the same that we had posted on our website since November. This includes just the definition of vaccination. This does not include the boosted. So the definition of vaccinated has not necessarily changed. So this is the percent of someone that has participated in 2 vaccines, a series or the Johnson & Johnson. Our nurses have access to the impact system and have able to look at the percentage of our students. So although our staff is updated since November, this one was done in February vacation. So we looked at our current population of our students and how many are vaccinated at each school. So Libby Tozier, 14% of our population of students are vaccinated. SPS has 23%. Carrie Ricker has 28%. The middle school has 32% of students. High school has 48% of our students are vaccinated. So that just kind of gives you just kind of a snapshot of RSU4 and the numbers. You need to understand that there are some locations such as like Walgreens that their students might get vaccinated there, but we may not see it in the impact system. So it's as good as the system is updated. So this is, kind of in general numbers as best as of what we have. So that is kind of RSU4 of our status. Any questions about that?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was muted. Any questions about the statistics to date? Eric?
One of the questions I have is in regards to the percentages for the pool testing. I thought is there any benefit to us doing the pool testing now, seeing the percentages as low as we have for the input? Because if I recall at all the school board meetings I attended, there was, I think it was 30% was the number, or there was a higher number. And I'm just wondering if this is probably down a rabbit hole, but with the amount of resources we have, and that was a concern at the beginning, is it warranted if we're only seeing 6% at Libby Tozier, or, I think 11% was the highest percentage I found.
Yeah, so that's why pool testing is an agenda item today, Eric. So thanks for that. So the original thought when pool testing was rolled out last spring was that in order for it to count in terms of you were supposed to do pool testing so you could get exempt if you were unvaccinated, that you didn't have to quarantine, was that hitting that 30% in each school. However, in terms of when we did the webinars and the training, it looked like it really needed to be about 70% of your population in order to really show effectiveness. So now that we've had a significant amount of time since the beginning of November doing pool testing and looking at our vaccination, that was the question for this team is, should we suspend pool testing at this point with the current cases that we have, the current amount of vaccinated folks that we have, and the amount of pool testing participant? Is it something that we need to continue or recommend suspension? So it is agenda item number 8, but you are absolutely right. So 30 was the magic number to get exempt, but obviously the exemption rules have changed since that thinking, but 70% is the magic number for effectiveness. Now that number could have changed since last. They like to change the numbers on us.
These things tend to change at a moment's notice. Any other questions about the data? No? All right, moving on. Updated SOP. So we got an update today, actually at 1 o'clock this afternoon. So Kathy, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the updated the SOP itself is still listed. If you Google main SOP, it was updated on February 16th, as I have in this document. That hasn't been updated yet. So the embargo statement that we got today at 1 was just Governor Mills and Commissioner Macon discussing that changes that effective March 9th, universal masking is no longer a statewide recommendation in these settings, but is optional. That is the terminology. So the SOP technically in our plan is we're following the SOP. So right now the SOP hasn't changed. Right now it states in the current SOP, updated to note that schools may conduct contact tracing if feasible, regardless of mask requirements in schools. So the change that we've had since our last CPT is that they uncoupled universal masking and contact tracing. So that was the biggest change. We now are fast forwarding that we're waiting for the wording of the new SOP, which we'll know will come out, but it will say effective March 9th, universal masking is no longer a statewide recommendation and in these settings, but it's optional. So I think part of the explanation has been Maine has never had a mask mandate. They've always had a mask recommendation. However, all of the things that we had to do if we weren't masked was kind of a daunting thing for schools. So that's where we're at in terms of that will come out once the DHHS and the CDC update that. I'm assuming we usually get it on Thursdays.
Yeah,
So I'm assuming maybe tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm thinking it'll come out tomorrow for
Yeah.
sure. So, that was that'll be a major change to the SOP. I mean, like Kathy said, the February 16th, it was the unmarrying of contact tracing and universal masking, and now the major change in wording with regards to masking. So,
Oh,
go ahead.
piece too that's not a change but is still in there. So I think when you're hearing a lot of districts talking about going optional, it is still there's still that line that the Maine CDC recommends that masks be worn by individuals completing their isolation and quarantine periods. So for example, if I am asymptomatic and I test positive, I have to do a 5-day quarantine. On day 6, I can come back to school, but day 6 through 10, I should be masked because I am still technically not finishing my quarantine period. So 6 through 10, if you're asymptomatic, you should be wearing masks in schools or anywhere, technically.
All right. Questions about that conversation? No? Okay. Moving on, masks on buses. So I know that originally, so universal the mask mandate on busing, and I can handle this one to some degree, Kathy. It originally was set to expire. So we have to remember that was a federal mandate, the NTSB, and TSA. And so realistically, that was set to expire on March 18th. Well, that has now been retroactively removed to February 25th, I believe, Kathy?
Yes.
Yep. So now there is no federal mandate for masking on public transportation retroactive to February 25th. Anything you want to add to that?
No, and I think that's why a lot of the school districts were waiting in terms of they were delaying.
Right.
There was a lot of districts that were saying, well, we're going to go mask optional, but we're going to wait till March 18th because they wanted to match busing, because it was confusing that like, oh, I have to be masked on the bus, but then I can take my mask off to be in class. So you'll see that. But now with the February vacation, the change of the TSA requirement, masks are not required on school busing or any public transportation for that matter.
Any questions about that? It seems like we've got some pretty, hold on, I gotta let somebody in here. There we go. All right. So that was a major change that happened last week. All right. Universal masking. Here we go. So obviously, as we know, there's a major change coming to the SOP for effective March 9th. currently the board has voted to be universally masked per and follow the SOP. One of the things that I did this week, I fielded some phone calls this week, and I said that, people were kind of wanted to talk at this meeting, and unfortunately, being a board advisory committee, there is no mechanism for public comment. One of the things that I did say was, if people wanted to email me, I would share the number of emails I got with this committee. And so my inbox got quite a few over the last couple of days. So I think it's an important statistic, and I promised I would share this to share that I had 2 emails this week regarding continuing with universal masking. So I had two community parents reach out and ask that we continue with universal masking. I had 28 emails in my inbox from people asking me to continue to do away, recommending that, or asking to do away with universal masking and going to mask optional. It's a statistic. I promised I would share it. I think it's an important one. Where this committee can't allow public comment, it is important for you to know that sentiment is out there, and pretty vehemently so. So I share that as for informational purposes. I don't know if you want to talk any more about things like that, Kathy.
No, I mean, I did receive like 4 emails as well. There was, asking us to consider it being optional, and just, I think it's just really important that the CDC originally went from recommendation to optional. And so this is kind of a conversation that we are at. On the packet, we kind of gave 3 options for the committee to kind of look at. Option 1 is to continue with the current plan of universal masking until they change their recommendations. So of course that happened, an hour before this meeting. Option 2 is just making masking optional. The exception is if we are in outbreak status, and I did put the definition of outbreak status. An outbreak status means that greater than or equal to 15% of absenteeism among students and staff in a single day, where the majority of those absent are due to COVID-19 illness. You need to know that I do run a report every morning that tells percentage of our staff out in each building, and that includes custodial, bus drivers, teachers, ed techs, food service. So we have to determine, and so if it's 10%, we kind of drill down a little bit more carefully of how much the illnesses or the absences are COVID related. And the secretaries do a nice job of doing the same thing with students. And then, so if we are in outbreak status, if we're above that 15%, we work with the CDC to determine if we are indeed outbreak status. So just because you're over the 15% threshold doesn't equal outbreak status. For example, we were above the 15% threshold in the middle school and high school that week that we went, where we had a workshop day, a no staff day, and then 2 remote days. We ended up that following week being in outbreak status, or above the threshold of 15%, but the CDC did not put us in outbreak status because the week before we were remote. So we would, if we were in outbreak status, the CDC would make us mask. The other one is, as I mentioned before, if a student or a staff tested positive, they need and meet the criteria to shorten the quarantine. If they come back on day 6 through day 10, they need to wear a mask. So that would be option 2. And then option 3 would go back to the color code system, which is similar to option 2. It's just a different way to clarify for our community. So it's about a communication piece. And I gave you the sample on the next page, where if we're at 0 to 14% of active cases, masking is optional, except for if you're a positive case coming back early in that quarantine time. Yellow would be is if the CDC deems us in an outbreak status, mask would be required regardless of vaccination status. But it's not required outdoors. And then red is clear that if the CDC recommends that we quarantine or we are lack of staffing, it's just to let parents know that remote is still an option. So it's option 3 is not really a different option than 2. It's just a different way of looking at it to make it clear for parents that we might have other times where masking might come back into the picture and into the schools. So.
And I think it's important to note that, you know, if we were to potentially be in outbreak status, the CDC would actually tell us what to do.
Yeah.
No different than when we have a pertussis issue or a chickenpox issue, things like that. The CDC actually tells us what to do. We don't get a say in that necessarily.
And
so
then there's always option 4 of whatever you come up with that we haven't thought about that would make it clear for that you want to discuss or vote on for recommendation. So.
all right, Betsy's raised her hand.
Hi, I was wondering, so for the color coding system, because we have within the district different counties, because right now Kennebec County is what? It's a different color code right now than Androscoggin. So what with the color coding, would it be, I'll let you answer.
It would be by school, not by county, because it's kind of a funky thing where sometimes our Androscoggin numbers are actually much higher, but our Kennebec color is it doesn't match. Like our cases are much higher in Androscoggin, but our color coding or risk level at Kennebec can be different. So we prefer to do what our active cases are in the school. And when we say active, it would be active COVID cases. So you would have to see that dashboard that you see on page 2 kind of go up into that 15% in order to constitute going into that yellow status. It's a great question.
Well, and there's been some confusion with regards, if you remember correctly, at the start of the pandemic, the state had a color coding system. And then all of a sudden the state dropped the color coding system and went to the US CDC's color coding system, which was very, very confusing for all of us because they were very different metrics. That was a tough one. We talked about that a lot at superintendents groups because it was confusing for us and confusing for the general public for sure.
And I think for us, Betsy, our thinking is that we do a great job of collecting our local data, that we would actually want to see what the cases are in our own communities. And since we have students that are from all 3 towns going into one school, we would want to look at the school level and where certain students like at Libby Tozier, they're vaccinated, there's less chance to be vaccinated because of their age. It looks very different than the high school. So we would rather do it by school than county.
Questions, comments, discussion? Yes, Eric.
So I guess looking at the 3 different options, I think the color coding one worked well at the beginning, but also looking at the numbers from, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy, but slide 2, we're looking at number of positive cases per month. My guess is that we'd probably still be in a mass situation if we went to that color coding, probably more often than not.
No, because we currently have 45 cases that were in February, but that's not all in one school. So we wouldn't get, and that might be 45 cases, but the quarantine time, right? It's like 15 days. So we actually were not in February, we were not in the outbreak status at all. So we were in January when we had the 173. We did have 2 schools in the above the 15%, but in February we didn't. So if it's
that would be option
out,
2, right?
Excuse me.
That's option 2. Option 3 was the color tier one that we had before, which was, I think green was 0 cases, yellow was 1 to 2, and red was 3 or 4. And if we were red, then it was mandatory everybody.
Yeah, so we would change it to this color coding system for the percentage because they changed what outbreak status was. So at the very beginning of the year till December 27th, they determined outbreak status of being 3 or more cases. But since December 27th, we went to the 15%, which is what we normally do as an outbreak status. So that's what my suggestion is in the change in this color code system versus our previous one, is that we're matching the new outbreak status definition.
So would it just be a green or a red, or would it be still a 3-tiered scenario?
It'd be a 3-tier. It's on page, I don't know.
Sorry, maybe I missed that.
It's the next page after universal masking. You'll see option 3 sample.
And I think
Oh, there you go. Gotcha. Okay. My apologies.
Yep. Nope,
And-
it's fine. So 0 to 14 would be green, and then that yellow would only be if the CDC deems us as an outbreak status. So greater than 50% of active COVID cases. And then red is if they determine we should go remote, or if we have lack of staffing.
Well, and I think Kathy, Kathy said it earlier, the 15% doesn't just mean a flat 15%. So really it's about that we drill down to what those numbers look like. So if we had, 100 people in a building, 15% would be 15 people, but you have to look down, we drill down into what actually they're absent for. That's why our attendance coding is so important.
Jeremy?
Oh, I didn't see your hand. I'm sorry, Jeremy.
No, you're fine. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this, and I think I am. But so because the state changed the recommendation today, our option 2 is option 1. They're the same basically,
Yes.
and option 3 is just a way of communicating option 2 with colors.
Yes.
So really, we only have one option on the board right now.
Pretty much.
Okay, that's
Yes,
what
when we
I
made
thought so.
this-
I just wanted to make sure, right? And I'm
Yep.
not trying to be critical. 10 hours ago, things were very different.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
They
just want to
were.
make sure that I'm aware that there's basically one option on the table. Just 2 and 3 is about how we present the option. Okay,
Yes.
awesome. So I just wanted to make sure yes, thank you.
And Jeremy, you just said exactly the conversation that Kathy and I had probably half an hour ago, maybe. I went, wow, this pretty much sums it up. I'm not sure what we're doing now. There's pretty much no, I mean, look, the reality is the board has the right to, make a decision that's different from the SOP, right? They do. I mean, that's the reality. But I think there's a lot of sentiment out there that it's time, especially now with the governor and the CDC coming out saying what they're saying, it's probably time to move forward. And that probably puts us in a place where there is one option, unless you all want to make a different recommendation. So I don't know, but yeah, Jeremy, you said exactly the conversation that Kathy and I had about half an hour ago.
I think you now understand how every time we make a document, it's outdated by the time we actually put it in print.
So Betsy.
I'm just curious, the 2 folks that had sent in the emails that were pro continuing with mitigation,
Yep.
is there a way that with whether it's the color coding or whatever, the option 2 or option 3, is there a way to acknowledge, because the CDC recommendations were based on 70% of the population. So right now, the kids that are under 5 and the immunocompromised right now are the least represented. So for the 2 folks that had emailed in, is there a way that we can possibly acknowledge or maybe communicate with people that are concerned, where it's just basically with these options, by the time that the color coding would go into play, there would have already been an active outbreak status. And so so I'm just trying to consider the 2 emails.
Yeah. Well, I think the 2 emails were sent to me before today's news too. I don't want to get into substance of emails, right? I mean, we could go down that rabbit hole. I could send you all the emails. We could dig into that, but that would be, I think, probably not valuable time. I think we do recognize, I think we've done a good job in this district of recognizing that there are those folks out there. And that's why I think it's important that we, when we talk about this, there's the mask optional thing is part of that. I also think too, I worry, and I said this to, Kathy and I talked about this the other day, when we go mask optional, I worry we need to be really clear about the messages that we send, that we're going to protect those that choose to mask, and we're going to protect those that choose not to mask, right? There's been a lot of I don't know how I put it, vehemence on both sides of this this equation, and I worry, and you know, having 4 kids myself, you know, other kids maybe having you know, making comments to kids about their choice to wear a mask or not wear a mask. So I think we as a school community have to be really clear that we're not going to tolerate that on either side, or from, you know, community to staff or kids to staff, things like that. I think that's a really important piece that you know, if we're going mask optional, we have to be vigilant in that regard to protect all, for sure. So Jen?
I just wanted to say on that note that at the beginning of the year when it was optional and some students wore masks and some students didn't, I saw it Carrie Ricker, at least at my school, like nobody said anything to anyone about it. Some kids wore it, some kids didn't. Everyone just respected everybody's choice, and that's what I saw here. So I just wanted to put that out there.
No, and I think that's good feedback. I think we're also 6-7 months removed from that, and there's a high level of anxiety and frustratedness amongst everyone that contributes to it now. But yeah, I would agree with you. You know, in the beginning when we were doing that, I didn't see a lot of issues necessarily, but I don't know what that looks like now, given the place society is in. So I just think it's something we need to have in the forefront, you know, in the back of our minds, that we do that. Kathy?
The other thing that we could do, you know, to kind of go with Betsy's point is if we're getting closer, when, you know, I flag it at 10%. So if we're at 10%, before we're heading into outbreak status, we could certainly let parents know that we're at 10% if you so choose to. We're not in outbreak status yet, but we've hit the 10% threshold. That could just let them know, like, if you think of like the spectrum, right, of what green is, that we're getting closer to that yellow. We could certainly communicate that with our community members, if that is something, you know, that is recommended.
Yeah. And that's pretty simple to do. I mean, we run those reports quite frequently, you know, every day, for sure. Marco?
Hi, good afternoon. Just a quick question in regards to the unknown. So let's say, for instance, there is another variant out there and it changes to the situation. You know, are you thinking, Andy, that we would, you know, get the group back together and revisit, you know, obviously the SOP or the mitigation plan, or do you think that we would just keep this plan in place and adjust, you know, as the plan is, you know, adopted?
Well, I think there's 2 schools of thought on that. You know, again, there's 2 ways that's been kind of rolling. So there's the piece of, yes, I think if things were to change, we'd get that group back together. There are also school districts where the board has made the determination that should the SOP change, then we follow the SOP. And have that blanket statement that we follow the SOP. And I think that's, you know, Jeremy brings up, we really don't have a lot of options. One other option that we have as a group is to recommend that we follow the SOP, and go that route with it. And then the board can take that action. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, if there were a change and there were a change to the SOP, this committee has been set forth to follow that and make recommendations to the board. So we would do that. Yeah.
And
Thanks.
in this information, Marco, it does say that if the trend or other variants come back, they will go back to recommended, not optional. So they kind of held their piece, kind of why the color code system sometimes makes more sense versus just like optional, because you can understand that there might be back to a different color and it's easy to switch and change based on the SOP.
I do like the visual. The visual is nice, and it gives everybody at least a heads up that things could change.
Yep.
Thank you.
Jody?
Speaking to what Marco was talking about, I just wanted to bring up, so here at the middle school, when we were mask optional, we were the only ones in the district who lived the green, yellow. It's hard. It's hard on staff. It's hard on students. And we had lots of discipline surrounding masking when we were flip-flopping back and forth between masking and not masking. So I like the 15% and the outbreak. I think that's a better metric than what we had before. And I know before we only had what we had, so we had to go with that. So yeah, and then at the if you can let parents know at the 10%, so we can start preparing for that kind of change, because it really was difficult. The nurses met this morning, and one of the things that we are very concerned about is the mandatory masking day 6 through 10 and how that will be handled. We're worried about privacy issues for people that are returning post-COVID and protecting them for that. And then also, how do we manage it? How do we enforce it? And how does it get communicated to, the staff that's going to need to enforce that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, I think it's very difficult. From my perspective, I don't know how you do. I really don't. I think that, it says recommendation. I don't know how you manage that. We don't have people to manage that, and I agree. I just think that from my perspective, and again, it's that old scarlet letter potentially thing. I just don't like it at all. And the fact remains, when you do that, trying to manage it is tough. So yeah, Jeremy.
I was just going to speak to the same 6 to 10 day piece there. Most of my conversations with students that were not in my classroom, but even some that were in my classroom today, dealt with masking, and they weren't all pleasant, and kids not wearing them appropriately. So, part of me is very excited to get rid of masking, so I don't have to have it anymore, because it hasn't been a whole lot of fun, and it seems at times to be silly to have kids wear masks and not wear them correctly. It seems a little purpose. But if we're going to go maskless or mask optional, and we still have students in the building from day 6 to day 10, they would have to wear their masks. And so how do we do that? I mean, in our case, we have students going between 4 teachers in a day. We'd have to know that. We'd have to be able to follow up on it. And I think we'd also have to have a very low or no tolerance policy, because they don't have to be at school if they're not going to wear their mask correctly. So I guess that's a piece for me that's sort of catching me up, caught up on. I'm not really sure how that would look or feel. But if everyone else is going to be around unmasked, and they're not going to be appropriate when they may be contagious still, and are aware of it, then I think they'd have to exit pretty quickly. So I don't know. That's just catching me up a little bit there.
Kathy.
So just a couple of things, just from just a couple of thoughts to throw out there. We do have students that are sick and are not getting tested for COVID. So they're just staying home, doing their thing. And so they might come back on day 5, and we actually don't know if they were positive. The other thing to think about is there are other districts that are doing more stringent than the SOP. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just letting you know that because they're going optional mask, or masking is optional, they're saying that if you get COVID, you have to do the 10-day quarantine, because they don't want to police that. So that could be something that this committee recommends. So there are districts who are requiring, whether you have a positive case in your household or you are positive yourself, to do the 10 days. So that is happening in other districts, especially in like the southern part of the state.
Thoughts?
I think, to echo what Jeremy was saying, I agree entirely, because that's the catch up that we have with everything, right? Is the privacy. Like Jody was saying, is how do you protect that privacy of the people? But I think you either have to be all in or all out with something like this. I don't think you can have a wishy-washy, because to the same extent, like you were saying, Jeremy, you could have someone who comes through that might be on day 6 that comes to all the classes, and if you don't know about it and you're not monitoring it, you could run into the same thing in the grocery store or out in public. And if they're not doing it at the school, they're probably not doing it there. So I think as a committee, we either have to look at it and say, maybe they're, like Kathy was saying, 10-day quarantine right off the top, or we just accept the fact that at the end of 5 days, they can come back to school. And our recommendation is this, but you have to understand that your hands are going to be tied and that you're not going to be able to enforce it or identify it or go from there.
It's a hard thing, right? Keeping kids out of school when they've been able to do the 5 days or not being able to police it. Yeah.
Who else? Thoughts on that? No? All right, so where are we landing with this? I mean, I think we have to make a recommendation as a committee. So where do we land? I mean, I think we have to go, I mean, from my perspective, regardless of what it looks like, the governor, has said as of March 9th, the SOP will be changing to mask optional. I think that's from my perspective, that has to be where we land to some degree. But the question then becomes, what do we do about that other piece? I know personally, Kathy hits the nail on the head. We have a ton of people who don't get tested. I mean, testing numbers are so down at this point. We don't know. So I think Eric's right. You're either all in or all out. The hard piece for me is telling kids they have to stay home. I have a hard time with that, considering we're walking around at the grocery store. But again, it's a recommendation from this committee of which I don't have a vote. So, so where do we land? What is the motion there?
I actually like option 2 when I look at it. I know that option 3 has that nice color breakdown and, we got tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, but I think sometimes, even though it's nice and crisp and clear, if we can give less information and sometimes more information, and people through it, even like myself, I looked at it earlier and thought, oh, this is like the old one. I didn't read it as in detail as I should. And I don't know if people, especially seeing as intense as the conversations were had at the beginning of the school year at the school board meetings, I don't know that people are going to care. They just want to know, all right, are we at outbreak status? Because if we're at outbreak status, we got to wear a mask. If we're not at outbreak status, it's completely optional on the kid and the parent. And I, again, just making it very black and white for people so that they know this is where we are and this is where we're not.
Okay. Anybody want to second that? Jen?
I will. I
Okay.
agree.
All right. Any discussion further? Yes, Jody.
So just going back to, so for optional masking, then where are we falling on day 6 through 10? And I'm just wondering.
Yeah, that's a good question. Where are we falling on day 6 through 10?
Well, Eric's motion shows that the kids can come back, but they must wear a mask. That's what the motion and that was seconded.
Okay.
It's listed there.
So the question becomes, how do we police that? Correct? Marco?
I mean, we'll know, right? I mean, and I say that in the sense, well, will we know?
We chances are good we may not.
So, I mean, it may be one of those situations where it's really difficult. With those that we do know, we work with them as we would work with any student in regards to an expectation and, disciplinary action, for not following a certain rule or protocol or policy in place. Yeah, I think that's where I would be at with it. I mean, the hard part is that the students that we don't know about.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that this committee needs to solve the problem of how we police it. I think they just need to create the policy of, do you want to let them come back on day 6 or
Right.
do you want to make them come back on day 11? So I think that's the charge of this committee in terms of recommendation. And it's an admin team to determine what the SOP is when we have students that we don't know that are sick that come back, or the students that are positive and come back. So just want to kind of go back to our purpose of as a committee.
And the reality is this, we're making a recommendation, right? So there will be more discussion on that at the board level. So Jeremy?
Yeah, as I said, earlier, I'm pretty torn here. I guess part of what I'm torn about even further is that, and I've, where I teach seniors, and juniors largely, I have students who talk about, well, I'm sure I had it, but I didn't get tested because I didn't want to have to deal with this or that. And, missing 5 more days of school, for some kids would incentivize them possibly to get sick. I would have been one of those kids, perhaps, depending on the course or the year I was in. But at the same point, it also may incentivize other parents and other kids to lie, which is a pretty difficult situation to be in and sort of swallow when so much is possibly at stake, community health wise. So I don't know. I would hope we could roll it out in a way that would say to parents and students, we want you here. We're unmasking for your benefit, and we're going to ask you to be honest with us about your health so we can make sure we don't have to go back to masks, because that's really what's at stake. But I don't know. I have I'm more torn, I guess, with that realization than I was a minute ago, even, for what it's worth.
Eric?
I think from the beginning, one of the big challenges too with all of this is it's all about getting the kids back in school, at least from being a parent in the background and following this pretty closely over the last year. When the first mask mandate came into, or mask recommendation came into effect, it was because, like Kathy mentioned earlier, we have to do this to be able to get students in school. Or if not, then there was a whole other level of ramifications that came into play. So I think at the end of the day, it's really, if whatever we can do to get the kids back in school as soon as possible, I think it's something we have to do. And there's a risk with everything that we do. And I think that's something that we have to try to minimize and, completely continue to encourage and reinforce that. But I don't know that there's going to be an easy solution that we're ever going to come up with anything on this. And I think if we can get something out there that's very simplistic for people to understand, here's the expectation, and then go from there.
Crystal?
Just speaking from the teacher's point of view, it is extremely challenging to get a good education to children who are at home quarantining and teaching them remotely. So if we can get them back sooner, and just like Eric was kind of just saying, and Marco was saying, just kind of, we can send it as a recommendation. And Jeremy was saying, just letting parents telling us, the community, just be honest with us if you can, please do. That getting them back in here, because remote learning over the last 2 years has been just the most challenging thing we've had to do so far, and I see nods. So if we can get them back sooner, I think that the 6-day recommendation is where I'm standing at.
So it sounds like the communication when we're rolling out the mask optional is we're saying, since we are starting to do mask optional, is if you're sick, to really reiterate, please stay home, right? And monitor your symptoms. And so that could be the elevator speech that's wrapped into the masking is optional, as well as if you are positive, doing 6 through 10 days, you will be wearing a mask. And then that optional piece of if we get to outbreak status, but that would be another communication after. But I think it sounds like the elevator speech should be, if we're going mask optional, I love it when at the beginning of all of this, Robbie says, is this taking a community to come together? And so we're asking, our plea is, when we did color coding option, and at the beginning, it was so we could get the people who wanted to mask and the people who didn't want to mask an option. And so we're getting to that point again. But as a community, we need to come together that if you're ill, for the sake of others, stay home. So that could be the elevator message as whatever we communicate after the board votes.
Yep. Eric, did you have your hand up? No? Okay.
Good.
All right. Any more discussion? No? All right. So we've got a motion and a second for option 2, making masking optional, with a good elevator speech about it takes a community. Oh,
Well,
Jeremy?
we could put an addendum there, except for if you're sick, please stay home. You
Sick,
could
stay
add
home.
that as part
Yep.
of that communication.
Yeah.
You could add a bullet there if you wanted.
That's pretty standard for us anyway. I mean, we've been touting that for years. If you're sick, stay home. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. So we can add that as part of it. Jeremy?
I was just going to ask, you know, I guess I would feel better in some ways if we had a meeting scheduled in which to look at any outcomes based on that part of the decision and see if we want to change it in a month.
We can certainly do that. That's not an issue.
You know, just as an ongoing issue, because, you know, and the other thing I thought about a minute ago too is, you know, there are some students, for instance, I've had a track record with of asking them to put their mask on correctly the entire time we've had COVID, all these protocols. Why should those kids get to come in on day 6 through 10? They've had a track record of not wearing their mask. They've never worn it correctly. Now we know they would need to the most. I wouldn't necessarily trust them to do so. So that's another thought, and that's perhaps beyond the purview in the moment, but just something that popped in my head.
I think certainly, you know, in response to the first part of that, Jeremy, is we will need to meet in a month or so once we go mask optional to see where we're at. I just think that's important. So that we can do easily. Betsy?
I was going to agree with Jeremy on just if we can almost approach this like the weather and how we respond differently, and we use different equipment, whether it's a blizzard or whether it's we're going to the beach. Is the 10% being able to communicate that with parents still on the table, or is that if it had been a different option?
Everything's on the table for this
Yeah.
committee to discuss.
Yeah.
The motion right now, as it stands, is just option 2 as it's listed on
Right.
that page.
And that may be something I do anyway. You know, we're at 10%. It may just be something we have on the website as data. You know, we've reached 10% in this school, just so people are aware, because the reality is this, as Kathy said before, you know, that if we get above the 15% and it's 15% due to COVID-19, the CDC is going to come in and tell us what to do most of the time. And so, you know, that is data that we will keep regardless. So we certainly have it. Eric?
Is it appropriate to put in here an addendum to say to match whatever the SOP is if it changes in 3 weeks? I think someone had made mention of that earlier.
Yep.
With the concern that if all of a sudden the state, you know, there's a new variant that comes out and the state changes the SOP very quickly and says, you know, now we're going to encourage all masking right away, that we could do that. And I don't know how that would be worded and appropriately.
Well, I think that it's actually option 1, just follow the SOP as written.
Right.
Oh, okay. Never mind then.
But obviously, if there's a massive change to the SOP and things change, this committee has to get back together anyway. That would just be, that's the process that we've used, and we would continue to use that process. All right, anything else? No? All right, so we are voting on Eric's motion, option 2, you know, with the addendum that if you're sick, stay home. So we'll do a roll call vote. Let's see, Megan. All right, I'll move on to Heather. Heather?
Yes.
Yes. Hannah?
Yes.
Marco?
Yes.
Crystal?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Jeremy?
Yes.
Betsy?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Allie?
Yes.
Jody?
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
And Eric?
Yes.
And then I'm coming back to Megan one more time. Megan, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I'm working. But
Yeah, that's
yes, I
okay.
vote yes.
Okay. All right. So that motion passes. So the recommendation to the board will be to make masking optional, except obviously for outbreak status and students test positive. The recommendation is the test positive, meet the criteria to shorten the quarantine and come back on day 6. We'll need to wear a mask until day 11. So that is what this committee will recommend to the board. Next item, pool testing. Kathy? This is a tough one.
Yeah, just like kind of Eric had suggested before. So I was doing my number crunching while we're all talking. The high school is at 12%, just for a fun fact. So you know, as we said, the 12% is our highest at the high school, and we kind of already discussed that 30% was to shorten quarantine, but effectiveness is 70%. So the conversation is, should we continue this practice, or should we stop? And so just wanted to see what the committee would like to do.
Kathy, can I ask you a question? What is the benefit to pool testing at this moment in time?
So we do pick up asymptomatic individuals. I will say the last piece that we had with Dr. Shaw was that our new variant, it might not pick up, the PCR might not pick up this variant. But we do pick up students that are positive that are spreading COVID and didn't know they were asymptomatic. And we do have some students that have 1 or 2 symptoms, and we do find it. And there are many times where we have a positive pool and we're retesting students and we do not find the positive individual with the rapid. That happens weekly, I would say, Jody. So we can retest these individuals 2 or 3 times a week, and we will not find the positive case.
So thoughts on continuing with the pool testing program, or recommending that we continue, or recommending that we suspend pool testing? Any thoughts on that? Marco?
Just, you know, being involved with pool testing at the high school, you know, is very helpful at the get-go to identify students, you know, that might need further testing or to quarantine. You know, I would say that it took a fair amount of time to start, you know, obviously with anything that gets going, but it was definitely, in my opinion, it was worth the effort. You know, it's, you know, probably our percentages dropped, Kathy, from when we first started, because it was, I feel like it was much higher than that, or it was a little bit higher than that. But you know, I guess the question I would have is, you know, how much time now is being, you know, taken to do the pool testing? Is it worth, you know, the outcomes that we're getting?
I mean, I think at this point we're, you know, like I said, 4 of our 5 schools at this point are getting negative tests. And so we're not even identifying any positive cases. Our numbers are low. That doesn't mean we won't get another spike and it won't change. But when we're in like less than 12%, I'm not sure we're really capturing what we need to in order to say that pool testing is effective. But again, it is something that for some individuals, it makes them feel better to send their students in a place that they can get a free PCR test every week to ensure that their child or the staff member feels safe. And as we're going unmasked, you know, is this something that we continue for a month until we regroup after unmasking? Is this something that we just want to pause because it's we're not getting the results that would show effectiveness? I guess that's why we're bringing this to the table.
Yeah, and how difficult would it be, Kathy, if we did discontinue to then pick it back up again?
It's taken me 4 weeks just to move the middle school and SPS to Mondays, and they still showed up. I would say it would take almost 5 to 6 weeks if we paused it. The thing is, either you do it or you don't, but to pick it back up, it's quite extensive to work with the company.
All right, thank you.
We're working with a third party and another company. It's extensive.
Yep. Thank you, Kathy.
Yep.
Jeremy?
I was just going to echo some of Kathy's sentiments there, where, you know, if we're going mask optional, some parents and some students and some faculty members, some adults may feel more comfortable. We may actually see some people want to add. given that, we are losing a barrier in some way. We're losing, in a sense, two barriers, right? One on the person who may have it, and your own protective layer as well. Right, I guess I would think, at least maybe for a month, hold on to it and see what happens.
Betsy?
I would agree. I would like to see if we could have just a little bit more time to see what the next week is going to do with, we just came back from February vacation, and what will the metrics be, 2 or 3 weeks from now. But my question was, what I know we have a nurse in this group, but what are the nurses saying? Have they weighed in on it?
Jody, where do you guys stand on this?
With the numbers so low, the percentages so low, we don't really feel like we're getting that much bang for our buck as far as the time element that's being put into the pool testing. So that was our discussion this morning. After we were able to take a look at the numbers that Kathy had sent out, we didn't realize the numbers, the percentages of people that are taking advantage of that were quite so low. And there was a question in the chat about still getting tested if we get rid of pool testing. And I would assume we would continue the rapid testing if we needed to. I mean, we have them, so we might as well continue to use them.
It's a different grant or a different process, so we could still do that. Yep. We had to apply to both pool testing and antigen testing. And so we could continue to do antigen testing.
I would recommend we continue to have those on hand. I think they provide from my perspective, they provided a valuable benefit to our community. A kid gets sick at school, we can give them a rapid test. That has been beneficial. Would you agree, Jody?
Yeah, we've seen a really nice benefit from that, and it actually does help us to get kids back quicker too, because we can offer to rapid test one of the, a symptomatic student on the way out the door. If it's negative, then they know they can come back as soon as their symptoms are resolving and they're fever free. And if it's positive, then we can recommend the isolation. Some of the discussion that we had today as nurses is, if we had folks that, if we decided to stop pool testing, but we had folks that wanted that safety net to still, that were already enrolled, we could rapid test them weekly, but that's just an option.
Yeah, it's been easier to get tests as of late, I think. From what I'm hearing, I haven't ordered any for a while, but
Don't.
that?
Not yet. Don't yet.
I may have over ordered. I'm not sure. I see Jody shaking her head.
It's all good. We had what we needed, so it's all good.
All right, Eric.
I think at this point, my thought on it is that I think we could get rid of the pool testing because the percentages are so low. I mean, even looking at the high school and using that as an example recently. So if we have 101 students that are in their 90-day window and 38 students are now testing, so are we looking at it and saying, well, now the enrollment that could be tested is 306 and we're only getting about that 10%, but we know that 30% is the mark that was given to us to say this is where we have to be baseline. And it truly doesn't even have an effect until you hit the 70% mark. So we're still about 7 times shorter than where we should be. So I struggle to think about the resources and the time and the energy that gets put into it. And knowing that we're recommending to have masks optional, like Jeremy, you mentioned earlier, could be the second tier. But again, that's optional. Anybody can put a mask on. When we sent my son to school for the beginning and when the masking started becoming, we asked him to wear his mask all the time. And to our understanding, he was one of only 2 or 3 kids. Yes, he's 5, but 2 or 3 kids that would wear his mask during the day. So I think we have to remember that there's still an optional component that if someone's really concerned, they can still wear their mask. But I just don't see where the benefit at only 10%, approximately 10 to 12%, and then the time, resources, energy of the staff, they're already taxed and at their breaking point in so many ways. I don't see the benefit.
Okay, Jeremy.
I guess just to counter that, the benefit may not be logistical in some way. It may not be financial. But if you're asking about people being comfortable, Mr. Carlton mentioned a minute ago, we had some people email about wanting to continue masking. We're going to have people in our community who are going to be upset that that's changing, even if their students still do wear masks. You know, we don't have the situation where we're 6 feet apart like we were last year. We don't have the ability to do some of those things we were doing last year to add more. And also lunches, you know, they are still at lunches and they're not spacing during lunches, you know, in our situation, in our cafeteria. So, you know, it may not be a benefit in the ways it was meant to be, you know, but also the state dropped 70 to 30, you know, it was, you had to have 30% even to get into it. And they changed that to, if you want to do it, you can do it. So, you know, I guess where I'm coming from is that there may not be benefits that are, you know, larger. They may be benefits that are just, you know, to a person where without it, they may not want to send their kid to school. And if we want kids in school, this is one way to help some parents and kids get over that hurdle.
So the other piece of data that's missing from this chart is I could not just only say how many pool participants, but how many positive pools we had. I couldn't, it would be a lot more work for me to say if we actually came back and found the positive pool, but I could actually show you like this week, how many, you know, 4 over 5 were negative or, you know, that kind of thing. And you could see the variance of if that was helpful. Because I think that, you know, if you wanted to see if it's effective for even the small percentage, are we grabbing 1 or 2% of the 12% that were, you know, tested? That might be helpful is if we had a different variant, or as we're going unmasked, if you wanted to see if we're catching more positive pools, that I could do that piece of data if that's helpful. Not to muddle the waters a little bit, but the number of positive pools I could report as well.
Eric, you have your hand up?
Is there the option that was mentioned earlier about still being able to offer rapid tests for those people that would want it as a screening tool? And do we have the resources? And, you know, Jody might be able to answer that a little bit as far as if we got rid of the pool testing, do we still have the option for those parents that are concerned, like Jeremy said, you know, we still have that group of students and group of those families that really like that thought for the comfort. Could they still come in and get a rapid test once a week on a, you know, Tuesday to provide that kind of substitute for them?
Jody, do we have those resources?
Yeah, that was part of the discussion that we had at the nurse meeting this morning, that if, you know, we had those families that were concerned about that and still wanted a weekly test, we would be willing to rapid test those students or staff, either. Mm-hmm.
Marco? I thought you had.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like maybe it's premature, you know, to just end it. You know, maybe we give it some further time. I mean, if we're saying that we're going to be back in a month, I mean, you know, does that help? I mean, it gives us a little bit of at least one mask or one
Change in variable.
yeah, thank you. One variable that we would, that we would get rid of, you know, essentially, and then we'd still have something there. And if we feel like things are going well, you know, maybe we can transition to the rapid test. I just the difference is that, you know, people are going to have to seek those tests out. They're going to have to come to the nurse, or they're going to have to, you know, remember or whatever it is. I mean, when we go around oftentimes with the cart, you know, and do nose swabs, you don't really forget that because you're showing up in a classroom and asking the kid to step in the hallway to do the test.
Allie?
Yeah, I just wanted to second that. I think I'm not ready to drop the pool testing. I think I agree with Jeremy. I think I agree with all what Marco just said. Not that you know, it might be time later, but I think at this point, more information right now is always valuable. So, thanks.
So anybody else want to weigh in on this? Betsy?
Just that I agree. I think it's too soon and we need some sort of metrics.
We can certainly table this item until our next meeting and not make a recommendation on that. Who would be in favor of that? By show of hands for a table. Seems to, Jody, where do you live with this?
I think we're spending a lot of time and effort and not getting much reward.
Okay. So I've got, so let's take a vote on tabling because I'm having a hard time seeing hands. Ally? Yes? To
So
table?
really the vote is to keep pool testing till the
Right.
next CPT, not necessarily
So-
to table it, but just to keep as is.
Keep it. Okay. so do
Okay.
I have a motion to keep pool testing for now?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, and Marco, all right, any more discussion?
I would just add the piece that Kathy said about if we get rid of it, it's gonna be tough to get it back.
Okay. All right, anybody else? Vote, Ally,
Yes.
Eric,
No.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Betsy,
Yes.
Jody,
No.
Jen,
Yes.
Crystal,
Yes.
Marco,
Yes.
Hannah,
Yes.
and Heather.
Yes.
All right, so that is a 9-2, and I will say in the chat, Amy had to leave, but she said for what it's worth, I think that maybe continuing pool testing the next month until we see the shape of things post February vacation would satisfy people who feel more secure with it. So sounds like she would have been in favor. All right, so the recommendation is the board is to continue with the pool testing program at this time. So. All right, that takes us through our agenda. So what we've got the two recommendations we're making to the board on March 9th, to go masking optional with the understanding of outbreak status, the ability to come back to shorten the quarantine, but it'll be wearing a mask day 6 through 11. So, and then the next recommendation would be to continue the pool testing program at this time. Did I miss anything? No? Anything else? No. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say for people out there who are watching, I appreciate you taking your time to come here. I appreciate all of you that are part of this committee for taking your time to be here today. These things are a commitment and we appreciate it. So thank you all and enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.